what would your advice be to, if they looked up Greg Bulsak, they would see like this quote or this piece of advice?
Let's go towards the quote end of it. Something that's been my wallpaper for years now. Many dreams die while suffering. And I'm sure you could, maybe not instantly, but you could put it together pretty quickly. A lot of people have these big, lofty goals that they can talk about. They're all motivated. And we've been coming back to this motivation versus discipline thing for a while. But once, let's use wrestling, for example. Once you're in minute 6 of a really tough match, you're super tired. You can't even feel your legs anymore. That dream slowly starts to fade. Dreams die while suffering, essentially. So, the one thing that's I've stuck with and that's lived in my head is making sure that, when I am suffering, when I don't want to do something, that I'm still looking at, what that end goal is, or like what I would think about tomorrow with this certain decision that I'm going to make and all those sorts of things. So like staying true to what my goals are and not letting, different hiccups or suffering, we're going to say in this sense, get in the way of that might be.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Rintic Singani podcast. Today, I got a really exciting guest for you guys. He is a 2-time D1 All-American Wrestling Champion from Rutgers University, a wrestling coach over at Columbia University, and the founder and CEO of the online fitness training program, Iron Elite. Please welcome to the podcast, my good friend, Greg Bulsak. Greg, man, how's it going?
Going great, Rithik. Appreciate you having me, man. Excited to be here.
Yeah, dude. I know we were speaking about this off camera, actually a couple of days ago, but I know you guys had a wrestling meet for Columbia not too long ago. I actually think it was last weekend, if I'm not mistaken. How'd that go?
It was good, man. It was good. So we're nearing the end of the season now. Postseason officially started last weekend. We had the Ivy League conference tournament. It went really well for us, I would say. I mean, it can always be better. But so the way it works with nationals is you can qualify spots for your conference tournament ahead of time. And, say there's a weight class, 125, the first one. Say there's 3 qualified spots, 6 people there, then the top 3 people make it to nationals. So that's how it works. We only qualified 2 spots going into it. And after the tournament came away and stole 3 additional spots. So we have 5 guys going. So realistically, what that just means is that we're wrestling a lot better than we were during the season. Because during the season, we only qualified 2 spots, and now we have 5 guys going. Knocked off 3 guys, 5 guys, half the team going to the tournament. Could have had a couple more people too. So overall, pretty exciting, man. Nationals are coming up in, 6 days here? So this is for all the marbles now.
Yeah, man, that's really close. So you qualified for 2 spots. Does that mean only 2 members of the team are in nationals, basically? Am I understanding that correctly?
No. So there are like what they're called allocations before the conference tournament, where, depending on how you did during the season, you can qualify a spot for your weight class. Now, we only qualified 2 going into the tournament, but when we were at the tournament, everybody still has a shot for it. Everybody still has a chance. It's not just whoever qualifies the spot. So we actually stole 3 additional spots from other people who qualified it. So we have 5 total when we were only expected to have 2. So that just means realistically that, yes, we can always do better. We could have got 10 people in, but, we're doing a lot better than we were expected to do and than we were doing most of the season, going from 2 to 5 people making it to nationals. So
that's great. That's fantastic, man. I think it's actually crazy, and we've spoken about this as well, where the amount of hats you wear is quite staggering and very, I'm quite, definitely something that I admire about you is your ability to time manage, with, all the hats you have. You're a wrestling coach at Columbia, you have your own, online business, and then I think you can do some sales. You have a sales job on the side as well, right?
I like how you say even do some sales when that's my main job with, the 40-hour work week and main source of income. Right. But yeah, I do those 3 right now.
That's hilarious. I'm just curious, like what do you do to time manage between all of it?
Man, I feel like time management, comes down to a couple of different things. And the first thing is probably going to be just liking what you do. Like if you like the things you do, it's probably going to be a lot easier to manage your time and get them done during the day. But if you're doing three different jobs, let's just say in my case, and I didn't like any of them, then it would be a lot harder to manage my time because I'd probably go into each of them dreading it and being like, oh, I got to get through this. Oh, I got to do this. But when you like it, man, it's a lot easier. So, I mean, I'm excited when I wake up, to start my day. I get up early, take a walk, get a coffee, go into Columbia, wrestle. I do, a lot of my sales stuff because I work remote, when it comes to the sales job. So I do a lot of that stuff at Columbia. I'll come back. I'll do some more of it. I'll do the coaching stuff at night. So it works out well. You got to love what you do, man.
I totally agree. Because then it's just, at that point, it's just play, right? Like
Exactly.
you're not noticing the time fly by. I completely agree with that. But I mean, I wanted to dive in actually with your one of your roles, which is wrestling in Columbia. So, I know that also in your business, some of your clients are also active wrestlers themselves. They actually compete in collegiate wrestling. So could you walk me through what's the onboarding, I guess, for a wrestler being a client? Like, do they usually DM you? Do you know them? Like, do you have any of the guys from Columbia are your clients?
Now so the guys from Columbia, I'll help them out free of charge. I'm their coach, so I'm not gonna
Of course.
do that. I don't have any that are like specific clients of mine, or even any that I micromanage as much as I do with any of my actual clients. But I do help them, with plans, with nutrition, those sorts of things when they have questions. But when it comes down to it, most of my audience on social media is wrestling, because I think, that niche side of it where a lot of wrestlers in the community post a lot about wrestling, a lot about technique, but not a whole lot post about, how can you optimize your nutrition? How can you optimize your strength training? How can you optimize your conditioning? So in the space right now, I'm kind of known for, the strength and conditioning side and nutrition side. So that's where, I get a lot of these different, and like you're asking, inbound leads, DMs, different wrestlers reaching out, asking for advice. And a lot of the time, I've given out a lot of free advice over the last year I've been posting. So it's not like I just get tons of people that are like, oh, I want to be a client. It's just, a lot of people are asking, hey, I saw you post this, what's the best idea for this? And I'll help people, however they need it, whether it's personalized plans, whether it's coaching, whether it's just answering different questions. But when it comes to the coaching side of it, I'll typically get a DM from somebody just asking about certain things. If they want to go really deep and they're like, hey, what do I do for X, Y, and Z when it comes to training, when it comes to nutrition, when it comes to this, and this, then I'll get on a call with them and start talking a little bit more about the coaching side. And be like, hey, this might be an option for you. If you're looking to improve in all these different aspects, maybe we can go through this and at least, do a test trial, see how you like it. And then go from there. But for the most part, it is inbound leads. It is DMs because I'm doing, I talked to you about it, but I've been building out a membership site for a while. So I wanted to put more of an emphasis and a priority on that. And then just have a select like 10 clients that I really enjoy, training and helping out, and not trying to grow as much within the coaching community. Cause, a lot of these coaches do have like 50 plus clients. If I did that, I would definitely not have enough time for some of the other things in the membership site right now. So I'm trying to manage my time as best as possible. Going back to that.
Well, it goes to being selective with who you train as well, because I think I was talking to like another trainer and a friend of mine, and I think there's something to be said about selecting the clients that would be willing to take your advice. Because I think the worst thing in the world is for you as a trainer to invest your time and energy in somebody, and then you just don't do what they tell you. Like at that point, and I know you, like you want to put value into people. So it's not even about the money at that point. It's just like, dude, like I'm trying to help you, but you're not doing what you're telling you to do, the things that will be helpful. So, now it's just like, you can take your money back. It's just, it is fine.
100%. 100%. I think, I've had the different run-ins before where a lot of the time, I am pretty selective with my clients. I tend to have a good relationship with them. They stay pretty long for the most part, but I have had clients before where just didn't really work out, where they're not really listening to, what I say, or they won't answer when I try to get on a call, or just little things like that. And it makes it really tough at the end of the day. So I think being selective makes me enjoy it a lot more because don't get me wrong, we're all trying to make money. It's, it's a reason I'm doing it. I'm trying to make more money and doing something I love, but I want to love it too. I don't want to just get paid for people to not see results. And then, I feel like I'm just, churning my wheels and not really accomplishing anything with people.
Absolutely, dude. So let's go into the clients that your wrestling clients that actually do probably listen to you. That actually, not probably, they do listen to you. So with your wrestling clients, what is your methodology for training them? Like, well, how would you answer that question?
Good question. I guess we'll have to assess where we're currently at. So if I were to say somebody, a wrestler would come to me in the postseason. So let's say April, somebody comes to me. I would first assess their goals, see what they're looking to do. Most of the time, postseason, it's going to be how can they improve strength? How can they increase muscle mass? How can they improve conditioning, become more explosive? And then the last thing is probably keeping fat bay at a minimum, because a lot of guys right after wrestling typically tend to, they just finished cutting a lot of weight. They just finished a really hard season. They want to be able to indulge. They want to chill out. But it's not always the best idea to just eat everything you want and quit training when you were doing, I don't know, 4 or 5, 2 days a week. So, the approach I typically take when it comes to a postseason is going to be analyze their goals, see where their current nutrition's at, see what their current training is like, and then start very, very slowly over time incorporating different, techniques of strength conditioning to be able to increase their explosiveness, strength, conditioning, teach them how to accurately calculate their macros, calories, just so it's something that they can learn over time too. At the end of the day, I want my clients to be able to track their nutrition, understand what they're putting in their body, understand how they can increase explosiveness, strength, all these sorts of things, not just listen to me say something and then they just go do it like a robot. I want them to understand and learn as well.
So that's interesting. So in the postseason, that sounds very comprehensive. So you're talking about, all right, how do we improve strength? How do we improve muscle mass, conditioning, explosiveness, right? How do we minimize fat gain so that once you get into wrestling season, you're not carrying around so much weight, so much mass, that it might affect the weight class that you're going to be competing in, right? And is that correct?
Yeah, you have to, during the wrestling season, you are very focused on wrestling and making weight. There is not a whole lot of time. Or realistically, you're probably not going to be able to gain strength or muscle or increase explosiveness. You'll be able to get more condition because you're wrestling a lot more. But a lot of these different things aren't things that you're going to be able to do during the season because you have so much time allocated to becoming a better wrestler and making weight. So we try to prioritize these as much as possible in the off season. And then once we get to the regular season, we can maintain what we've built. And then just really focus on improving wrestling and all the competition because we have a ton of matches during the year. So these guys got to make weight all the time. They got to compete. So it's, it's something that you have to focus on in the off season. And when it comes to like the, keeping fat gain at bay, if you go into a wrestling season and you're 30 pounds overweight and you have way too much fat, that's going to be a long road trying to get back down and make weight and then maintain that. So if we can, after the season only gain, let's just say 10 to 15 pounds, maybe like 5, 6 is water. Maybe you put on 5 to 10 of fat. That might happen because you're really lean during wrestling. But then it might only take 1 month, 2 months to lose that going into the season. And you're much more equipped to feel really good in your training and not so focused on cutting weight all the time. You can focus on wrestling. You can focus on getting better.
So it's almost like if you do a good job postseason postseason, because the postseason would then lead up into the next wrestling season, right?
Yeah. I mean, you have about 6 months in between. Typically.
Yeah. So you take those 6 months. So I'm assuming you have to be really diligent and disciplined about those 6 months because you can't. It's now no longer just about the performance from last season. You might even have to think like 10 steps ahead for the next season. Depending upon you get out of the wrestling season, you look at your performance. Like, okay, now I got 6 months to shore up any weaknesses, stuff like that. So it sounds like the postseason is much more comprehensive in that respect than preseason is because, like you said, they're busy with wrestling.
There's a lot of moving parts for sure in the postseason because, you have all these different goals, but, in improving your performance, but then you also have to make sure that you're managing the nutrition side of it as well. And it's very similar to, post-cutting phases with, just people who are looking to get in better shape or get leaner or, I guess it would be probably a little bit closer to like a post-bodybuilding competition where these guys are dieting for so long, they're so lean, and they just want to eat whatever they see. It's very similar to wrestling because you're making weight a lot and you might not be as lean as a bodybuilder, but you're doing much harder training and you're still making weight and it's tough. Like you get very food focused, just like bodybuilders would. So you have to make sure that you incorporate a reverse diet as best as you can after a wrestling season or a bodybuilding competition, because you are in a prime state to be able to gain a lot of fat whenever your calories are a lot lower. You're making weight all the time. You're training a ton. And then when all that goes away and you have no worries in the world, then it's pretty easy to just be like, oh, let me go eat this McDonald's. Let me go get this crumble cookie. Let me do this. Let me just chill. I've been training pretty hard lately. I'll just chill out. All of a sudden, that's where the pounds start coming on. So you got to really, micromanage your nutrition. It doesn't have to be like that forever. I mean, after 2 months of slowly adjusting, slowly, putting more of an emphasis on strength training, you can reverse diet up and maybe you gain 5 to 10 pounds, but you're feeling really good. Some of it's muscle, some of it's fat. Your calories are increased. It's not a forever thing at the end of the day.
Absolutely. And so actually, let's dive in more like deeper into this. So when you're looking at, let's say a wrestler comes to you, say, Greg, so I got 6 months to work with here before the next season. You know this, you wrestled yourself. So let's look at training because you can get into the weeds with both the dieting and training for wrestlers. So when you look at a wrestler that says, hey, so I want to improve my strength. I want to put on muscle. I want to improve my conditioning, explosiveness. I'm assuming those are majority of the I would say not issues necessarily, but
the goals for the wrestlers.
Goals. Correct.
Yeah.
The goals. Those are the majority of the goals they're going to come to you with. So, walk me through, okay, the training. How do you go through and think about, okay, what training am I going to put this guy through that's going to help him meet those goals?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think, there is a general consensus across the board where the training is not going to be that different in what types of exercises, like how we're going to increase the explosiveness, the strength, how we're going to incorporate different strength and conditioning principles. I think it's going to come down to the individual and how, we can really assess what plan that they're going to do, because first we have to look at what their current training looks like. We don't want to throw a bunch of things at them right away. So then all of a sudden their body's shot instantly and they can't recover for the next training session. So we want to see what they're currently doing. We want to see if they've had any injuries or limitations to see what exercises we can incorporate. If somebody has, a low back injury, let's say a bulging disc or something like that, or they've had one previously, maybe I'm not going to add in heavy deadlifts. Maybe that's not the thing for them. So just little things like that where I'm going to assess first. And then from there, once I see what their current training is like, if there's any limitations, if there's exercises that they prefer that feel better for them versus others, then from there, we can be like, okay, we're going to start with this base of a program that's going to have different things. That's going to be, strength training. It's going to have, when the strength training could consist of, powerlifting. It could consist of bodybuilding stuff. It could be functional movements, plyometric movements, all these sorts of things, incorporated into multiple training sessions per week to be able to maximize all those different things. Because like you said, there's a lot of different things that go into it. We're not just looking to build muscle, not just looking to increase strength or explosiveness. It's all of the above. So we have to incorporate a few different things. From there, I'll start to, I'll just put in like a different plan for them. I'll make sure that we can assess on a day-to-day, week-to-week, how the training's feeling. We'll try to increase over time, just with different variables, different factors. Maybe it's their intensity in the gym. Maybe it's their volume. Maybe it has to come back to the nutrition. Maybe we have to increase some calories or protein. Maybe we have to decrease. That's always something too, where, maybe the training that we're currently doing is a little much and they're not recovered for the next session. Then we have to look at, okay, how can we incorporate different techniques like, adjusting volume and frequency, but decreasing amount of training, and then we'll slowly add up to it. So there are a lot of different variables. But I would say, the frequency, the volume, the intensity or three that you're really going to want to analyze in the beginning to make sure that they can progress over time.
So frequency, volume, and intensity. Those are like the three levers you're going to play with.
Yep, for sure. And like I mentioned, exercises across the board are not going to be much different for most people unless they have limitations.
Okay, interesting. So the wrestling clients that you have, they might not do any exercises differently from, let's say, a client who is average client, so to speak. They don't do sports. They don't compete. They just might want to get in shape. So let's say you construct a chest day for a wrestling client and a chest day for like your average client. Both might be doing barbell bench press. But is there anything you do for the wrestling client that you have them focus on with that barbell bench press or with that squat or with that deadlift that is supposed to translate into translate into the sport? Because contact sports, man, like, I mean, I do jiu-jitsu, so I'm familiar with, and I do wrestling like 1 year in high school. There's a lot of moving parts. It's not just eating a bar off your chest. You're eating a full-grown human being sometimes who can think and moves their body weight a certain way. So I'm curious how you account for that.
No, that's a great question. I'm actually glad you asked because yes, like I said, the exercises across the board could be the same. You know, you could be doing a bench press, you could be doing an incline dumbbell press, you could be doing squats, leg extensions, all the same exercises, but like you mentioned, a chest day. So maybe as a wrestler, we're not going to have just a chest day or just a chest and shoulders day where we're focusing on, you know, pumping as much blood as possible into those muscles and just getting a little bit stronger. Maybe it's going to be like an upper body day where we focus on a pushing and pulling compound movement that is more geared towards strength. And then we superset that with the plyometric movement, because that's what's going to increase explosiveness. The more type 2 muscle fibers that we can activate and recruit by supersetting those two different movements are going to be able to help the wrestler increase strength, increase explosiveness, where with somebody that's just looking to, you know, their functions to be jacked, I'm not gonna put in plyometrics. I'm not gonna put in some of that stuff unless they want to train a little bit more like an athlete. But there's not as much a point to it because it's not really going to place a stimulus on your muscles to grow. It's going to help you with explosiveness.
So, and some education for some of the viewers. I do vaguely remember the difference between type 2 and type 1. Could you explain that actually?
Type 2, fast twitch, type 1, slow twitch. So, you know, distance runners are going to have a lot of type 1 muscle fibers because they're running at the same pace for a long period of time, or a similar pace, I guess you could say. So more endurance focused. And type 2 is going to be speed, explosiveness, power. So, you know, 1 rep max, you know, an Olympic lift, a sprint, those sorts of things.
So this is interesting. So are there any exercise, like, do you prioritize the one type of strength, the one type of muscle over the other? Do you prioritize type 2 over type 1? Or are there instances where you want to do both? You want to make sure both are actually good?
It's a good question. You know, for wrestling, since it's so niche, like you're not doing a 100-meter sprint versus a 2-mile run. You're doing a 7-minute match, which is shorter, but you need burst and you also need endurance, so you have to train it all.
Mm-hmm. I figured, because there were times in jiu-jitsu where I would have to push like an opponent off of me and then quickly scramble back to get on top. And I think the pushing off might have been the type 2, which is the explosiveness of your chest, and then they actually both might have been type 2. I would say type 1 has to do more. You'd say type 1 has to do more so with endurance, right?
Yeah, for sure. I would say, you know, when you're wrestling, if you do a double leg, you know, or a penetration step, any sort of shot, that's going to be explosive. You want to fire off as fast as you can and get into somebody and be able to take them down. And then the type 1 are going to be, if you're on top and you have to ride somebody for a minute, maybe your forearms in your grip, you're squeezing for 1 minute, 2 minute, you know, that might be where type 1 comes in a little bit more. Or if you're in your stance for 2 to 3 minutes, your low back, your hamstrings, you know, all your leg muscles, they're in that same stance for 2 to 3 minutes. And then you have another period, another 2 to 3 2 minutes, and then another period, another 2 minutes. So that's where the type 1 would come in a little bit more.
Very cool. So as you're training a wrestler for over these 6 months, does the training, I understand it's individual, but in general, do you ramp up the intensity close as you get closer to the season so that by the time they exit the 6 month period and they go back into full wrestling mode, they're used to an intensity of just of wrestling? Because dude, wrestling is tough. It's not just static lifting in the gym.
I would say with that, there's not a huge difference in how I would probably adjust it from a regular mesocycle, because you still want to be able to, and when I say mesocycle, that's a training cycle that's typically 6, 8, 10 to 12 weeks. I'm not going to spread out a training cycle over 6 months because it's too long of a time period. If I did that and I tried to increase the whole time, first, they just wouldn't be able to increase the whole time. Or second, if they were increasing the whole time, then we had an issue with intensity early on. So we want to still incorporate a few different mesocycles over that time period. And each one, by the end of it, we really want to increase intensity, increase volume, increase frequency. So I don't think it's going to take 6 months to get to that intensity point that you're talking about, to be able to prepare for wrestling. We'll probably do it multiple times over the 6 month time span. But when we get closer to wrestling season, what we will likely do is have a lot more wrestling incorporated along with the strength training, maybe a couple additional cardio workouts that could be aerobic based, which aerobic is going to be more type 1 muscle fibers. Think aerobic, think with oxygen. So you're utilizing oxygen over a long period of time. You're breathing, you're controlling your breathing, and then anaerobic, think without oxygen. So we'll do anaerobic exercises like bike sprints, that'll be like 30 seconds on, 30 seconds off, or, 10 off, 10 on, regular sprints, or, very explosive strength training movements, all these sorts of things. So it's not going to be a huge difference in the resistance training side of it, but we're going to make sure that we get more conditioning in, we get a little bit extra wrestling in so we can adapt our bodies to that training stimulus by the time the season rolls around.
Absolutely. And so we said that 6 months, again, very long time span. So you're going to have multiple mesocycles in the 6 months time span. I'm assuming each mesocycle is going to have a specific goal too.
100%. And I think the overarching goal of each of them, there's a couple of different ways you could program training programs where you could have different types of progression. I like to stick with linear progression over time. So all that's going to mean is, we have specific exercises we're doing, and we try to increase slowly through, different things like we talked about, frequency, volume, intensity over each mesocycle. I think it's the best one to do. I think it's the easiest one to do. And I think you can keep doing it in each one. Now, there are different ways where we could have a full mesocycle focused on muscular endurance, and then a full mesocycle focused on strength, and then a full mesocycle focused on explosiveness. But I like incorporating all of them into one and just being able to get the most out of each one. Maybe we switch up exercises, rep schemes, different things like that after we finish a mesocycle. But I don't like to stray too far away from what the previous one was.
I'm going to ask you, so, since they're already so physically active, do you apply this to both postseason and preseason? So since they are already so physically active, do they weightlift at all at the same frequency as, say, a bodybuilder or any of your other average clients? Like they do maybe they do a 6-day split, or is that too much weightlifting? And can a wrestler get away with 3 days a week or 4 days a week?
They could do both realistically. And I'll even say for myself, because I wrestle with these guys every day. I'm still out there on the mat with them. I'm not just the guy standing on the side saying, do this. I wrestle with these guys every day, and I also lift, I'm doing more of a 3 on 1 off split. So I'll lift 5 or 6 days a week too, and I'll still wrestle all the time. And that's what these guys can do too. Now, during the season, when we're competing a lot, maybe not. We don't want to be lifting multiple. We're not going to, like I said, we're not going to be getting stronger and increasing muscle mass during the season. We're looking to maintain. And when it comes to maintenance, they actually just came out with a couple of different studies on this meta-analysis on how it's much easier to maintain muscle than it is to be able to increase muscle. So they were able to, I don't want to butcher the numbers here, but in a study, they were able to maintain 96% of their muscle with reducing frequency from like 3 to 1 times per week. Muscle groups in volume was more than cut in half. So it was way less training per week. You can still maintain muscle, and that applies directly to wrestling. So if you're looking to maintain during the season and really just focus on your wrestling, you can maintain with way less. Now, like you're asking, when it comes to 4, 5, 6 days a week in the off season, it takes much more to build muscle and strength. So if their training schedule allows, if they're recovering well, because this is individualized, we can definitely ramp to 4 or 5 sessions. I typically don't do 6 with anybody because I think 6 is a little overkill, especially if you have pretty solid intensity and you're wrestling a lot. But 4 to 5, most definitely.
Interesting. So going off that, I was listening to a podcast episode with Dr. Mike Israetel, and I don't want to butcher the numbers, but Dr. Mike said something about how even if you don't exercise consistently, let's say you take, I think the minimum was like 2 weeks off of lifting, the rate at which you're going to lose muscle is significantly less than you would think. And actually your muscles have a memory to them. So I would imagine you could have a wrestler, let's say you guys got back-to-back tournaments or back-to-back meets. Maybe they're not able to weight lift at all. I think, well, one, the training would take care of that in a sense, right? In part because there are some similar movements in the training, right? Pushing, like pulling, or you're doing like an arm drag or something. That's basically you're training like a row in a sense. It's a similar movement. So that might with the strength training in that aspect being taken care of, and then they could still come back to the weight room and find that their physique has still been pretty much maintained. Am I kind of right?
Yep, I'd say you're mostly in the money, but one thing we have to consider is, with some of these studies too, and this is where, I can kind of contradict myself on whenever I talk about this. With these studies, we're talking about people training in the gym and then not training in the gym. We're not talking about elite level athletes that are doing very catabolic things. So anabolic is going to be able to build muscle. Catabolic is going to break muscle down. So we're doing catabolic things by training for 2 hours, wrestling a day, and then we're cutting our calories down and doing extra workouts to make weight. So there is a side of it where muscle loss might come a little bit quicker because you're in a calorie deficit. You're doing tons of cardio. Maybe your recovery isn't quite as good because all of these other factors are increasing your cortisol and your stress. So there is that side of it. But I think you're totally right in the sense that just wrestling, you're using your muscles. So you're going to be able to maintain muscle just by wrestling too. But you do have to make sure that you're dialed in on some of those other, external factors, which could be protein consumption, calorie consumption, recovery, all the managing stress, just like all the things that when you're doing a regular diet, essentially.
Interesting. Do you find that it's easier for wrestlers to cut weight to meet a weight class, or is it harder for them to bulk up to a weight class?
If you were to ask a wrestler, they're going to tell you that it's harder to cut because they're all cutting. But I'm going to tell you that if these wrestlers were in a position that they had to bulk to not just the weight that they're typically at. So, say somebody is a 157 pounder and they typically weigh 165 and they have to cut down to 157. Then they're going to be like, oh, it would be very easy for me to go up to the next weight class, which is 165. But if you had that same wrestler try to bulk up to, let's say, 184, I'm going to say that it's much harder for them to be able to do that during the season than it is to cut that weight. So it depends who you ask. Like we're talking about, it takes much more to be able to build muscle than it is to lose muscle or just lose weight in general. Because for a calorie deficit, if you're in a 3,500 calorie deficit, you lose 1 pound. So just doing that over time, you lose weight. For muscle, it's a little bit harder. You got to make sure you're in a surplus. You got to make sure you're recovering. You got to make sure you're getting stronger. You got to make sure you're doing enough intensity and volume and all these different things. It takes a while. So, the wrestlers are going to say, hey, cutting sucks. It's so much easier to bulk. But if they were put in a position where, they were at their maintenance, let's call it maintenance weight, and they had to gain 10 to 15 pounds, it would be harder than cutting weight.
Well, it's interesting you say that because I'm curious. Do you have them do any more cardio? And maybe this might change postseason in the season itself. Because I would think that I would think that the wrestling training would be sufficient from a cardio perspective. If you're trying to from that, right, to check the box in cardio, you're doing enough. Postseason, do you have them do more cardio because they're not actively wrestling?
Good question. So, they're typically wrestling still, so I'll add that in there. They're just not wrestling as much. So let's say you're wrestling 5 or 6 days a week during the season, and you're wrestling 2 to 4, in postseason. You're still doing wrestling, you're still doing cardio. It's just less over time, and you're not looking to make weight. But I don't necessarily incorporate cardio the same way I would incorporate cardio for somebody else, somebody that's not a wrestler, where maybe it's just to burn calories and, keep their cardiovascular system healthy. For a wrestler, I'm going to incorporate cardio to improve their conditioning because it's performance-based outcomes. They don't need let's go in the gym just to improve your cardiovascular endurance and burn a few extra calories. Like, we're looking to make sure they can improve their performance in all aspects. So, it's the difference between having somebody go do 30 minutes of steady state cardio, whatever they want, elliptical in the gym, and having a wrestler go do maybe a 20-minute anaerobic bout of activity that is very, pyramid scheme focused, and we're trying to simulate a match that can go into much more detail at the end of the day.
Interesting. So cardio, it sounds like cardio as a tool the usage is different. It's somewhat different. So if you're a normal person, it might be used to strip away fat. I think even my plan, you set for me, the majority of my cardio was, on a treadmill, elliptical, or steps if I could get it in. But for wrestlers, I'm imagining probably more dynamic movements. I'm assuming you're having them do probably a lot more things that's going to test their endurance rather than just getting steps every day.
Let's compare you to a wrestler, and what we would do here. So, like with you, when we were cutting, and we were going through that phase, your goal and your function, and I mentioned this before, is to be jacked. So what we're doing is we're making sure that we're maintaining, the volume, the strength, all the things that we built in the bulk, when it comes to the training side of it. And then when it comes to the cardio side of it, we're trying to make sure we don't impede recovery in any fashion for the actual lift, because that's most important, but we're trying to burn more calories. So that could come through, extra steps. It could come through cardio. It could come through a bunch of different things. It doesn't really matter what. We're just making sure that we're maintaining muscle and we're in a calorie deficit. Now for a wrestler, when it comes to the cardio side of it, and this could be on the deficit side of it or the surplus, whether they're gaining weight or losing weight, doesn't really matter. We're looking to improve performance. So even though it is generally healthy for them and they burn calories just the way other cardio, other people do cardio does, and then they also are improving their cardiovascular system, they have a bigger goal that is going to be how can they improve their performance in a wrestling match. So that's the thing that we have to factor in when it comes to their conditioning and cardio.
So would you say the principles between the two, like the core concepts, are the same, or they're kind of different, it sounds like, in application?
I'd say it comes down to the goal. So they're both gonna burn calories no matter what type of cardio you do. It's gonna burn calories. They're both gonna improve your cardiovascular system. It's gonna make your heart healthier. But at the end of the day, the wrestlers aren't doing it to be like, oh, I want to be peeled, or oh, I haven't done cardio this week, so I got to get a little something in. It's like, hey, how can I get better at wrestling?
Yeah, absolutely, man. So the other pillar of this is diet. And we talked about diet a little bit, and I wanted to get more into the weeds with the diet as well. So postseason, you mentioned that wrestlers, an issue they might run into is the fact that after wrestling season, they might just pack on a bunch of pounds. We've actually spoken about this off camera. Mm-hmm. So first and foremost, is that what you often see? Is that how they come to you as, or is it pretty random across the board? Some do it, some don't. Like, I'm just curious, like what the layout, what the demographics kind of like.
This is a good topic to bring up, because we're going to find out this year, because I started doing a lot of the social media stuff, and don't get me wrong, I've been involved in in, strength training, conditioning, all this stuff, wrestling for years and years of my life. So people who knew me would ask me for general advice and tips around nutrition, strength and conditioning. But when it comes to the social media side of it, I started doing it about a year ago, maybe a little over a year ago. So did I have people right after wrestling season or right around, finishing wrestling season reach out? Yes, but I didn't have nearly as many followers as I do now. So that started to trickle in a little bit more in like April, May, June, when some of my reels and, posts and stuff started to take off a little bit more. So I think I'm going to notice a little bit more now, and I already have, because the season is over for a lot of high school kids, a lot of different people, everybody outside of Division I wrestling right now, the season's over. So I've been noticing an influx of DMs of different questions relating to how they should structure their training now, how they should go about, their nutrition, different things. But when it does come to that, I can even give an example. One of my guys on Columbia's team right now, he didn't start this year. He was a freshman. Most of the time the freshmen don't start, and they're just doing like open tournaments. They're not going to nationals. And, he asked me in the beginning of the year, like, hey, I'm trying to lose weight. Like, how do I do X, Y, and Z? I was able to get him on a, I don't want to say a meal plan, but like a macro plan to be able to incorporate a calorie deficit, lose weight over time. And now he came to me and said, hey, I want to make sure I'm doing the right things after the season. I don't want to gain weight too quick. I want to do it the right way. What do I do here? So I asked him, are your calories still right around where we had them set? I think it was 2,500. He's like, yeah, I've been in the 2,500 to 3,000 range. I said, okay, let's start out then, because you're still wrestling. He's still lifting, just not quite as hard. Let's start out at 2,800 this week. Let's assess what happens to your weight, because the scale is going to be a key indicator, outside of performance-based metrics too, on how we increase your calories or decrease even in that sense. And then over time, over the next 6 weeks, we're going to try to increase this no matter what. So you can get to a point where it's a lot more sustainable on higher calories. Your weight slowly went up, and it's easier for you to be able to enjoy different foods and also improve your performance in the gym. Because at the end of the day, being heavier on the scale, eating more food, focusing more on strength and conditioning metrics is going to improve your performance when it comes to gaining muscle and strength.
So when you have a client come in, and do you ever change what foods do you recommend certain foods to eat during the season itself versus like postseason, like depending upon the mesocycle that they're in?
I think generally, it does come down to, just like everybody preaches, you should be eating a lot of whole foods, some healthier things. But during the season, I would try to focus more on carbohydrates, more on voluminous foods, things that could fill you a little bit more, because you're cutting weight. Like, you want to feel filled, but you also still want to have the energy to be able to perform in the multiple training sessions you're doing per day, per week. So during the season, that's what it's probably going to be. It's going to be more dense foods, not calorie dense, but just voluminous, higher quality. Cheat meals here and there, you're human. But at the end of the day, more whole foods. And then in the postseason, if you're looking to gain weight and you're looking to relax a little bit more, then you can incorporate different food groups that, let's say the healthier whole foods that aren't as filling. So you could compare something like white rice to potatoes. Potatoes are probably going to be a little more dense, a little more filling, maybe per calorie than white rice. So maybe even when you're healthy or eating healthier, you do the white rice in the off season and you do potatoes in the regular season. And then you could look at other factors too. Maybe we increase your fats in the postseason just to be able to get more calories in. So, your avocados, your olive oil, all those sorts of things. That's when it comes to the whole food, nutritious side of it. But I think in general, you're not a robot. You can eat cheat meals. You can do, things in the off season that you typically can't or shouldn't do during the season, because you need that psychological break at the end of the day, and you can still reach your goals by having, some balance in your lifestyle.
We've actually even discussed this, and it's the concept of using food strategically for wrestling, like matches, actually. Because you just described how the foods you're going to have them eat are voluminous, more carbohydrate focused, probably. Could you go into that, like how actually even within a tournament you can use food strategically before you might have like a match?
Yeah, so let's use the example of post weigh-ins. So for instance, a lot of guys are probably going to be within 5 to 10 pounds of their weight that they have to make for, let's say, a tournament during the week, and then they have to cut some water down at the end of the day. That's what most wrestlers do, so they have to cut some water the last day or two. How can we optimize nutrition post weigh-in within that 2 hour time period before they have to wrestle, and then they have, throughout the day after that? So what I would do in that sense, and what I have a lot of my guys do when it comes to post weigh-ins, is first, within that first second of stepping off the scale, you want to make sure that you can get hydrated, you can get electrolytes in, and then you can get quick, fast digesting carbohydrates in. So maybe 16 to 32 ounces of water with an electrolyte packet, let's say 500 milligrams of sodium, 300 to 500 potassium, maybe even a little bit more depending on how dehydrated you are. And then something like a quick acting carb source. So it could be Gatorade like dextrose. It could be highly branched cyclic dextrin, which is a carb source that is much easier digestible and isn't as harsh on your stomach that you can typically get in supplement form, or just any sort of sugar. That's going to be the best thing right away. So I try to have them do that, and that's pretty easily digestible. So they're going to get that in. And then within 30 minutes of that, maybe they took in 50 to 100 grams of carbs, 1,000 milligrams of sodium, and 32 ounces of water. Within 30 minutes of that, we're going to have a whole food meal that is, you might not have potatoes and broccoli and lean beef. Like, you're not going to bring that to the tournament. So maybe you have some easier things that are, like a deli sandwich, 4 ounces of turkey, 2 slices of bread, piece of cheese with, 2 pieces of fruit, and let's say a Cliff Bar. So you're getting a solid amount of calories in, a lot of carbs in, a little bit of protein too, to be able to make sure that you can recover. Because at the end of the day, even though carbs are primary focus, you still want to make sure you can recover from these matches, and especially after, a hard weight cut. And then the one thing though is we don't want fats too high. We want fats at a moderate level. And that's why I said, a piece of cheese, and that was only our only fat source within those food groups. Because if we have fats too high, and a lot of wrestlers will tend to eat like 2 peanut butter and jellies with tons of peanut butter. And maybe it works for them. Who knows? Everybody's different. But if you have very high fat content in a meal when you're trying to digest food easily, it's not going to work, because fat slows down the digestion of everything you're eating. So maybe you eat that and you're still bloated in 2 hours going into your match. So you want to make sure you get things that are quick, fast digesting, give you instant energy, and then can also be sustainable energy over time. So we get the sugars in right away, very quick, and then we get the complex carbohydrates that are sustainable and quicker, and then, fats kept to a minimum, so it can be sustainable, but it's not dragging on over, 4 hours of digestion.
Yeah, so I was going to say, I can relate to this. So when I was actively competing in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu tournaments, one of the foods that I would eat was just a banana or two. Probably just one. I think 2 was what bogged me down. But I remember there was this one instance where one of my favorite foods to eat is, and I've done it before a workout, and it works this way, where you get like a tortilla wrap, you just spread peanut butter or almond butter on it, put the banana in, and then you roll it, and you make like a sushi, basically. That was great, but I think was one time my mom maybe put too much peanut butter in the roll, and I just went out on the mat, and I just felt slow. I was moving through syrup. And of course, what do you know? The guy just double legs me like that. And I'm like, all right, well, that's 2 points gone. And then it was just not a good match after that.
No, 100%. And it's funny because you probably see a lot of this on social media. It's all over now, where there is like 500 calories worth of peanut butter versus 500 calories worth of this, 500 calories worth of that, where peanut butter, it can add up quick, man. If you get a scoop of peanut butter out of a jar, maybe it's a small scoop and that's a serving. 1 serving of peanut butter is not going to kill you. Like, that is fine. You could have something like that. But if you're somebody who loads it up and like puts 3 servings on, 3 servings of peanut butter is about 50 grams of fat. That is, quick math, 450 calories worth of fat that you're going to have to slowly digest over hours. So as long as you are you can eat these fat sources, but as long as you're making sure you're mindful of how much you're actually taking in of that, you'll be fine. So like you said, having some almond butter and a banana on a tortilla wrap, completely fine. If you load it up and you triple the serving for the almond butter, you might not feel so great.
Absolutely. And I think what's interesting from a scientific perspective, you explained this to me, and tell me if I'm right, but what you're basically doing is, I think taking us back to the kind of 7th grade biology is when you eat carbohydrates, but you don't metabolize them immediately, you store some of that as glucose. So essentially what you're doing for your wrestlers is you're building up the glycogen stores for them to use as like when it's game time, basically. Is that kind of right?
Yes. And now the thing is, and you know this too, the glycogen replenishment process it takes time. So we can't just, let's just say we're running on fumes. We have barely any glycogen in our muscles and we make weight. We're not going to be able to just fill out our muscles 100% with glycogen in this process, no matter what we do. But we want to make sure that we can do as best as we can to be able to provide, good energy sources before the matches. So let's say we can, and this is just random numbers here, but if we can get to 50%, 60%, that's a lot better than if we, didn't really pay attention to what we were eating and we only got to 25 or 30% post weigh-ins. So that's the kind of the reasoning for trying to get the super fast acting carbohydrates in first. So then we have that influx of glucose right away. And then after you start to get some electrolytes, some carbohydrates, some water in your system, you hydrate, then you can have that sustainable source to be able to fill out, like you're saying, glycogen stores in your muscles to feel a little bit better throughout the day.
Are there any times where you're a coach, so you're seeing your guys like 5 days a week, and you're seeing them like day in at the daylight to like the end of the day, right? So I'm sure you're assessing them. Are there any times where you see a wrestler and you're like, I think it would be good for him to actually come down a weight class for his own performance? How do you make that determination, and how do you do that for them? Because you mentioned the concept of a reverse diet, and I kind of wanted to get into that.
Yeah, I think it's more of an eye for it at the end of the day. I think, just as being involved in wrestling for a while and like being a coach, whether it's me or one of the other coaches, you can just tell if somebody looks a little bit undersized. If they look like they're getting overpowered, if they don't have the strength, then they have to do either one of two things. They have to either come down in weight, or they have to make sure that they can gain weight and gain strength to be able to be a full-sized person at that weight. And the way you go about that is you can't necessarily, in the middle of the season, make those changes. Right. It's very tough. So it has to be like, hey, we have to do what we can here, but next season, maybe we should make these adjustments.
I imagine, for the average person bulking, you're not entering into like one-on-one combat, so there's not much at stake. But for wrestling, I'm assuming there's some nuance to bulking, because like I had an instance where in jiu-jitsu tournaments, if I gained like 5 to 10 pounds, I would go up a weight class, and then it wasn't 5 to 10 pounds of muscle. It was more so just 5 to 10 pounds of just fat, Mm-hmm. So it wasn't adding to performance. It was actually detracting. And so I'll get my butt kicked because I was going up against full-grown men at the time, because I was probably only 17. When you do that, I'm going against guys who I'm not even, from a strength perspective, able to combat. But if I had actually stayed at my current weight, but then or maybe even gone under maybe 5-10 pounds, then I would perform at same level even better. So yeah, actually, I'm curious. Like in the middle of the season, you said yourself there's not enough time to do this. So what do you guys do?
Well, let's say it's a starter, for example. You have to just make do with what you got at that point. Like we're not going to put on, if you're going up in a weight class, you're not going to put on tons of muscle mass, but you might have to make do with what you got at that point, and you can definitely increase your energy levels. You can feel better during your training by having more food for performance. You can get better at wrestling. You can focus on strength training. It's not going to work out, as much as you would like when it comes to like the off season and gaining strength and muscle, but there's not a whole lot you can do. There's not a picture perfect answer to be able to be like, oh, you want to go up? Yeah, we can do this. And you can hop on trend and then we're fine here. You have to make do with what you got and then really prioritize it. And you got to prioritize it in the off season. And that comes with making good decisions in the off season. That comes with knowing, where you need to be, how you can get yourself to a point where, let's say you bulked up enough to where you cut down and you're at the perfect weight, or let's say you were pretty big for your weight and it was a really bad weight cut and you need to do it a little bit easier in a more sustainable way and keep your body fat lower during the season for next season, then you need to prep ahead of time for that too. So it could go either way.
So it's actually, so that work has to be done beforehand, actually. I see.
Yes. Yeah. And it can be done within the first month or two of the season too, where you're adjusting to that weight class. But it has to be done early on, because if weight is an issue for most of the season, then you're not focusing on wrestling anymore. You're just focusing on making weight or gaining weight, whatever it might be.
You actually had a client spotlight not too long ago that I actually wanted to ask about, because I think that client spotlight can highlight, we just talked about a bunch of principles, but I think it would be interesting for you to walk me through this client spotlight. You said, so I think you on your Instagram page, this specific client was dealing with a lot of binge eating, and he was just using extreme cardio to get back to the physique that he needed. But what was happening is he would like eat a ton, and then he would just, walk like miles and miles, or run for like an hour. It was not sustainable. Could you go into that client?
Yeah. And he wouldn't mind at all if I say his name. It was Jack. He was a wrestler, at a very high level too. He was a D1 wrestler. He was a smaller guy, so he's making 125, and he was very shredded. He's still shredded. But what an issue that comes with knowing a little too much about training, nutrition, calories in, calories out, is that that if you're shredded, it takes a whole 3,500 calories to gain 1 pound of fat. So if you have a binge day, let's say, you went 5,000 calories over what you burn, which is a lot, but that doesn't, account for binges. Then okay, I can burn this and make up for it within like a 2-day, 3-day time period. So it's good that you know how to be able to lose that weight, where most people don't, but it's bad in the sense that so you can just go do a lot of output, and you're so disciplined with wrestling over the years that doing all that extra work isn't much of an issue for you. So then you keep going through that process of binging, losing all of it, and then being like, oh, well, I'm really hungry right now. I'm going to eat this, and then it leads to this, and then it leads to that. And it's not sustainable over time. It makes you very food focused. So I can dive a little bit into our approach with that. But I think at the end of the day, it's sometimes it's a blessing and a curse to be able to know, what it takes to lose weight, from a mental perspective, and just from, a knowledge perspective of understanding like thermodynamics, calories in, calories out, how you gain weight, how you don't.
Yeah, it's like almost the curse of knowledge it's knowing is actually becomes more detrimental to your progress than had you probably only known the last. So that's interesting you say that. Mm-hmm. Yeah, actually, if you don't mind, could you dive into, because from what I understand with Jack's progress with his program, one of the key, if I remember correctly from the Instagram post, one of the key parts of that program was maintaining strength in a sustainable way, not increasing the calories too much every week. So could you go into how did you work with Jack to figure that out? Sorry.
Yeah. So, it's going to be very similar to how I would go about the process with any other client initially, is understanding, what their calorie consumption currently is, what their training currently looks like, and then adjusting from there. Now with somebody like Jack, and somebody who, who's very food focused and in this sort of yo-yo dieting process, binge eating and then restricting and going back and forth, we have to figure out something to take their mind off it. And I've went through this process too. Early on, I've done a lot of different cuts in my life. And one of the first ones I did, which was finishing high school, actually, senior year, I just wanted to see how lean I could get, because I was very into bodybuilding. I have been for a long time. I wanted to see how lean I could get. And I got very lean, but I was so focused on that cheat day at the end of the week that I would crush food. And the way to get out, it's so hard to see yourself super lean and then coming out of that. gaining fat, it's tough sometimes because you're like, wow, I'm so lean. I like how I look, but you feel horrible. You're so food focused. So how do we come out of that? And there's a lot of different things that I'm going to measure, when it comes to Jack and how we can do this, but we have to make sure that you can shift your mindset to another goal and what we're going to get out of, how we can change your training and your nutrition and these sorts of things. So like you mentioned, we might do it a couple different techniques to be able to reverse diet, to increase calories over time, to gain strength, to gain muscle. But how can we get Jack's mindset or anybody's mindset to be able to enjoy the process of this? So as you're going throughout the week, yes, you're enjoying a little bit more food, but if you're enjoying and you know that you're fueling your workout, that you're about to hit a bench PR on, and you're about to, enjoy like, a lot better pump than you're typically used to because you're just used to burning calories, like shift the mindset to enjoying the process and fueling performance. It ends up being a much better outcome at the end of, the coaching, the mesocycle, whatever it might be. So we shift from this is what you look like to, hey, how can we improve your performance and shift your mindset on a day-to-day to reach these goals?
That's interesting. So I can imagine that a lot of trainers would say, no, you have to eat this broccoli, chicken, and rice. And I don't care what you say because you might not enjoy the broccoli, chicken, rice. So that might negatively impact you going into the workout. And then that might, that's going to impact like your performance. And whereas with you, it's more so coming from the perspective of, listen, there's a sustainability and consistency that I need you to maintain. And the way you the way you get that consistency is that you do need to enjoy that process. And it even applies to a lot of exercises you told me. You told me that, listen, I'm not going to give you an exercise you don't like to do. That doesn't make any sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And, it's, I'll bring up an example too of, something me and Jack would talk about like on a weekly basis where he would say, I'd be like, oh, what was your weight? I see you didn't add it in here the last couple of days. I'd be like, oh yeah, I forgot to add this in here. It was like X, Y, and Z, whatever. And if it was a couple pounds heavier, he'd be like, yeah, it's crazy because, a few months ago, if I weighed, 2 or 3 pounds heavier, I'd automatically think, oh, I got to wake up and I got to run like this far. I'm heavier right now. But now the way I think about it, he went on vacation. I remember too, a specific example. He went on vacation, ate a little bit extra. He was like, now the way I think about it is this is going to fuel a really good workout tomorrow. And my mindset is completely shifted and, I can get a really good pump and I can feel really good about what I'm eating and spread my meals out throughout the day and not be like, oh, I'm saving all these calories because I burn so much so I can eat it as much as I want at nighttime. He's spreading out those meals. He's focused on, some of the performance in the gym, increasing weight over time. And don't get me wrong, you don't want to just go over your calorie target every single day and be like, oh, well, I'm going to have a good workout tomorrow. But when it happens like once a week, you can go over your calories, you can get a really good workout, and you might even burn extra calories in that workout because you're having such a good workout and, it feels much better. Enjoying the process is going to make things much easier rather than being like, oh, how can I get through this to eat whatever food I want to eat?
So I'm curious, in the beginning, was Jackson was already at the physique that he wanted, or did you have him cut or bulk up to anything?
So physique, I mean, he wanted to get bigger, he wanted to get stronger, he wanted to increase muscle mass, but like his physique wasn't the main goal. The main goal is really getting on a structured program and being able to get away from being so food focused.
Okay.
And he loves training. So it made it very easy. Training in general, I want to say. He wasn't, doing strength training all the time and trying to be a bodybuilder or anything like that. But we shifted his mindset a little bit more geared towards improving performance in the gym, because if you do have a surplus of energy on a day-to-day, or you're reverse dieting, you're increasing, maybe it's not a surplus yet, the way you're going to get the most bang for your buck in not accumulating fat mass and staying pretty lean is by strength training, because it goes towards growth rather than, if you're running, it's not going to go towards growth. You're just going to burn calories. So that was a way that we were like, okay, well, if we're going to get away from being so food focused, we have to place a bigger emphasis on strength training. So, you don't feel like you're getting fatter, or like, you need to, burn all these extra calories to maintain your leanness.
Interesting. So, going off of that, I'm curious, would you say that, I've heard you say this before, and please tell me if I'm not saying verbatim what you said, but it's more so like balanced cardio is key. And you're actually, in some cases, you're better off focusing on the strength training and the diet to lose the weight, or to, rather than like doing a ton of cardio like Jack was doing, right?
Yeah. And when you think about it, having more muscle mass is going to increase your basal metabolic rate. So that's the calories that you burn just sitting here and just living, essentially. So if you have more muscle mass, you're going to burn more calories. People look at cardio as a way to burn a ton of calories, which is great, which is true, but it's not going to be a way that you burn more calories by doing absolutely nothing. So that's the first thing that I'll always tell people why you should focus on strength training. The next is going to be, if you focus on strength training, you're going to look better. And I guess that's relative to some people. Maybe some people want more of like a skinny runner's look, but at the end of the day, most people want to have more muscle. They want to have more of an aesthetic physique. And the only way you get that is by training in the gym, resistance training. So that's another end of it. And then I would say too, when it comes to the strength training cardio, or strength training calorie output versus cardio calorie output, in 30 minutes versus a running versus 30 minutes of strength training, you're going to burn more in running. But are you typically going to strength train for 30 minutes? It's probably going to be closer to an hour. Are you going to run for an hour all the time though? Most people aren't, unless they're distance runners. Like I'm going to say 99% of people are probably not running for an hour every day. That's only people who are, either crazy about burning calories, they love running, or they're competing, or, if they're wrestling, maybe they're doing wrestling for an hour, whatever it is. But most of the time, you're not doing cardio for an hour, over an hour in a day. So if you can focus on strength training, most days, you're probably going to burn the same amount in those hour 15 workouts that you would in your 20 to 30 minutes of cardio that you're doing anyways. So let's take that out of the equation now too. Burning extra calories, okay, in a minute per minute, yes. In a workout per workout, probably not. So you're increasing muscle mass, which is going to burn more calories just at rest. And then you're burning the same amount of calories in the workout. And then you're also improving your aesthetic and your physique and how you look. So like, I think those are the three main things that are really going to, that you should really look at and assess whenever you're thinking about, okay, how can I get to my goal physique, or, goal look, whatever that might be.
Well, absolutely. Well, when you told me that was such a paradigm shift for me, and I was already listening at that point. But when I was thinking about it, because I know friends or family members who they have a resistance to resistance training or to strength training, because they're like, I don't know if I want to start pushing weight just yet. So what they'll do is they'll go on the elliptical or they'll go on the treadmill. But what you just said, did you describe like scientifically, as you recomp your body and you replace fat with muscle, it might take longer, but that muscle will actually burn more calories versus it's like an over time thing versus, yeah, you might be burning more calories in the 30 minutes you run versus the 30 minutes that you strength train. But one, an hour of running that's not sustainable. And then two, I mean, yeah, it's making your heart healthy, but very often I just see people that just binge eat after the fact. So then the running's not, the running you've wasted the effect that the running was going to have on you.
You bring up a really good point that I forgot to mention when it comes to that binge eating factor. I saw somebody, I forget who it was, but somebody put this on social media not too long ago, and I resonated a ton with it, and this is just like when I talked about, this with Jack, where you can go work out. Let's say you run, let's say you lift. And then let's say you have a little summer event you're going to, you're going to be drinking more, you're going to be eating more. If you're in that calorie surplus and you just ran for 30 minutes before, that's just going to be fat accumulation with whatever that surplus might be, because it's not putting a stimulus on your muscles. Maybe a very small one, using your legs, but not anything to grow any sort of real muscle mass in your quadriceps or glutes or hamstrings. But if you trained, then that surplus could go towards muscle growth. And then it could go towards your training session the next day to increase muscle growth again. So you have to look at like the surplus and, what you're eating in different ways too, where this is fueling my training to be able to increase muscle mass, which could make my physique look better. Or you have to look at it as like, okay, well, if I eat more calories, if I was in a surplus today on the day I ran, then realistically, and I'm not doing strength training, on a weekly basis, then realistically, that's probably just going to be stored as fat instantly. It's not going to go towards muscle growth.
Absolutely. And even the mindset thing too, because when you start to see changes, it takes a while. Don't get me wrong. Like when we first started working together, I didn't really see changes until, I started sending you progress pictures. And then you were like, dude, you look better. And I was like, I'm not seeing it. And then it was only a week after the fact. I was like, oh, wait a minute. I have a bicep. This is great. But the mind loop where you see your physique improving is much more rewarding I think on a dopamine level, like reward, that it encourages you to keep lifting versus I don't think that exists in the same way that pure cardio is going to give you. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. What do you think?
I totally agree. I think that you can definitely get a runner's high. You can get a runner's high and you can feel really good after that workout. But you're not going to see physique changes over time through purely running unless, you're very overweight and, you're doing a lot of cardio and you're losing a lot of fat over time, then yes. But for most people, that running is probably not the best thing for improving your physique. It's probably going to be the strength training. And like you're saying, when you see that improvement, after realizing, 2 months, 3 months go by, and you're like, oh, I'm not really sure. And then you look back at progress pictures and you're like, wow, my shoulders look a lot bigger. I look a lot bigger here. Like this looks better. Then that gives you that dopamine release and you're going to enjoy it a little bit more. Now I will say if you're cutting and you add in running or some form of cardio on top of strength training, then, maybe you're getting the best bang for your buck because you're able to maintain that muscle mass and you're losing fat at the same time. But when it comes to, this versus this and improving your physique, it's all, strength training is always going to take the cake.
Yeah, but see, the way I conceptualize that is think about like a block of marble. So cardio is a specific tool that we use in the tool belt, right? Like, I think you would agree with that, right?
Yeah,
so,
for sure.
So strength training, I think of is the big sledgehammer that's going to break off the pieces of the marble, like of that granite block that are just like, it's going to produce the biggest impact. And then cardio, when applied correctly, is maybe that smaller hammer that's going to chisel out like the details. Would you agree with that analogy?
I would agree. From a physique perspective, 100%. I think the bulk of it is going to be the resistance training. And I'm not anti-cardio. Like, I think cardio is great for your health, your cardiovascular system. Even that dopamine release that you talk about, like sometimes I am dragging, man. Sometimes in the morning I'm dragging, or like even midday if I don't go to Columbia or something and I have the luxury of working remote, if I'm like tired and I haven't really done much and I do like 20 minutes of cardio and, don't have anything on my schedule, I do 20 minutes of cardio, I feel so much better. So like, sometimes there is the mental side of it. The cardio can help with a lot too. But coming back to what we're talking about, the physique side of it, like you're saying, like getting chiseled out of stone, being able to chop down and see it. Yeah, that's how I would view it as well.
Absolutely. And just to really quickly add, I think it's changing now because of the amount of information that's out. I mean, you yourself have referenced like a bunch of studies. I was watching some of Dr. Gabrielle Lyon's content. She advocates for a lot of strength training as well, but she says it more from the perspective of staving off chronic disease. Because I think people might watch this as like, dang, you're really like against running. Like, no, I'm not against running, but I think it's underestimated the healthy effects of having like a healthy amount of muscle mass on your body. Even just from a physique perspective, I think one thing she talked about was the concept of how healthy skeletal muscle mass, I forget the percentage of how much it cuts your chances of developing things like cancer, but it was a significant amount, and it actually helps with preventing, because people sometimes lose their life to, it's what's called cancer cachexia, I think it's called. Basically, it's the wasting away that happens when you don't eat because you're being pumped through chemotherapy drugs. And then but then it's like more so from the cancer, it's kind of eating you out. Having a healthy amount of skeletal muscle and then actually kind of, maintaining that will stave off the effects of cancer cachexia. So just wanted to add that real quick. I think people, again, I think it's changing, but people underestimate the many benefits of skeletal muscle apart from a good-looking physique.
Yeah, it's great for longevity at the end of the day. And then, when you think about it too, injury risk. When you get older, if you're, a lot of, let's just say somebody 70 years old, you see they fall down the steps and they break this, and this, when if, 30 years younger, they probably wouldn't. And yes, bone density, things like that, come into play, where strength training is going to increase bone density. It's going to increase muscle mass. It's going to strengthen your tendons, your joints, all those sorts of things, where it's beneficial to, from an injury perspective as well as you get older. And I'm not saying you got to go bench 405 when you're 70 years old, but if you're doing a little something, it's going to pay off in the long run.
Yeah, if you can, you're a freaking beast.
That'd be awesome.
I want to know what genetics you have. Yeah, fantastic. And actually, we can loop that back around to wrestling too, because injuries, I'm sure, are not uncommon in contact sports. I've had my fair share sometimes. Actually, funny that you mentioned lower back problems earlier. I have a degenerated disc because of, it was a lifting injury that was exacerbated by jiu-jitsu. But the head black belt, when the one time I came back from college and I'd been lifting consistently, the thing he said to me was, "Oh, that's great, like injury prevention." Could you actually talk about real quick like how weightlifting helps with wrestlers preventing injury, and maybe even people in general?
Yeah, you could look at a couple, like I mentioned, bone density increases bone density. So, breaking bones is just harder at the end of the day when you're resistance training. And then you could look at it, I guess from a common sense perspective, we could say if you have a lot of muscle mass around your legs and you're really strong in those sorts of areas, then you're probably squatting a lot of weight, which means that your tendons and ligaments, and not just your muscles, your tendons, your ligaments, your bones, all those sorts of things have to sustain that weight in that specific lift too, which then when you're wrestling, if you're put in a compromised position where your knee's in a weird spot or something, like if they are a lot more durable, your tendons, your joints, your muscles, and they're put in that position because of the strength training over time, then it's going to decrease your risk of injury at the end of the day. So all that strength training isn't just for muscle too. It's going to be for all the other things, all the connective tissues that come with it as well. So you can then improve performance and make sure that you're, because at the end of the day, recovery is key no matter what you're doing, whether it's improving muscle strength, wrestling. You want to stay healthy for as long as you possibly can. So if it's just another way to do that, then, the wrestlers can be on the mat more.
Absolutely, man. So kind of switching gears, but I did mention that we work together. We're still working together actively as of this call still as well. So full transparency, I am an Iron Elite client. And actually the funny thing is the way we met each other was a mutual friend of ours connected. I saw him promoting your stuff. And I was like, "Dude, is that your personal trainer?" He was like, "Nah, it's just my homeboy. Like, I'm just posting his stuff, just trying to get just trying to help with his business." And I said to myself, you know what? If I'm going to take fitness advice from anybody, I'm going to take it from somebody who looks like that. I swear to God, I said that to my dad. And later we did eventually meet in person, and we did a little bit of wrestling, a little bit of jiu-jitsu training. I think that evening ended with you just smushing my face into the mat, and you had me in like a shoulder lock. So good times. But then afterwards, we then kind of constructed a plan. So actually, do you want to take people? Let's take people through my plan, because I think there's some application to a lot of the principles that you just described that work for wrestlers would also work that transfer over to the average person as well. So if we want to start, like my plan initially, if I remember correctly, it was the bulk. And so I wanted to gain, I think, 20 pounds of muscle.
So I think, we touched on it a little bit. The differences between like you and, a wrestler, a wrestler in the postseason, let's say that they're bulking too. They're going to be very similar in the sense that we're going to try to gain strength. We're going to try to increase volume, frequency. We're going to increase calories over time. But I think the difference are going to be, with a wrestler, there's a lot of performance-based outcomes that we're looking for, like the strength, the muscle, the explosiveness, the conditioning, translating to the mat. With you, it's like, how can we get bigger muscles? How can we look better? How can we look more aesthetic while decreasing fat mass, of course, or minimizing fat mass if it's bulking? So I did a very similar thing with you. I remember I was like, hey, Rithik, what do you eat in a day? Typically, what do you eat? And include everything, snacks, like coffee, all the little stuff. From there, I'm going to, what I did with you, I'm going to calculate out what your calories are typically at, where your macro set points are on a day-to-day right now, and then just see where we're at. And if your goal is to gain weight, it's going to be like, okay, first, let's look at protein. Are you eating enough protein? Which is going to be, the literature states 2.0, 2 grams per kilogram. But you could just be a little bit more simple. Go a gram per pound body weight is always good. A little bit more protein isn't going to hurt you. So we're going to go gram per pound of body weight. And then we're going to keep your fats in a relatively decent spot just for hormonal levels, for testosterone, IGF, cholesterol, all these sorts of things. So it's going to be in like a 20 to 30% range. If you prefer more carbohydrates, we'll keep it on the lower end. If you prefer more fat sources, we keep it on the higher end. And then the rest is going to be filled with carbohydrates, just for glycogen replenishment, anabolism, energy source, all those sorts of things. So depends on your calorie goals, but I'll be able to assess them from there, whether you want to bulk or cut. We bring them one way or another way. With the training side of it, you have anything?
No, actually, I was just only going to say, like, when you had me with the diet, we did actually like a breakdown of what I ate. So like you said, so I think we changed certain things and then just maybe increased calorie portions. So you actually even gave me some tips, like adding more, olive oil to your food, like when you're cooking the pasta to make with your pasta and ground beef, like stuff like that too. It was very helpful.
Yeah, I think, I can give and I will give sample meal plans, for all my clients, for people that want personalized plans. In case that just makes it easier for them. And I'll make sure that it's around food. I'll adjust the foods in a way that it's very similar to the structure you already have, just to make it as easy as possible, unless your diet is just all over the place. Then we got to change some things. But for the most part, I can keep it fairly similar, but make sure that the calories, the macros are adjusted a little bit to be able to hit your goals. But outside of the sample meal plan and the different food options, recommendations, stuff I'll give, I want to make sure that I'm giving macro and calorie set points and that my clients learn how to track their calories, because at the end of the day, even if, most of the time you eat the same thing, there's going to be days that pop up where you're traveling, where you're out on the weekend, you go to dinner, you do something where you're going to fall off the meal plan, and you don't want to freak out over it. You want to make sure that you're still on track. Nothing's going to change. That one day isn't going to kill you. So how can we do that? Well, then we can track our macros and calories, so we're hitting those same numbers every day, because at the end of the day, those are what matter. Not the specific food groups, but the calories and the macronutrients that you're consuming on a day-to-day to reach your goals. So that's one thing I wanted to add is, you don't need chicken, rice, broccoli meal plan. Like, you can achieve your goals with a bunch of different food groups as long as you're hitting certain calorie numbers and macronutrient numbers. Now, on the strength training side of it, with you specifically, we assessed, okay, what is your strength training typically like at this point? If it is very low and you're not doing much, well, then let's get a base. Let's start doing just 3 to 4 days a week. And I think we started at four or five.
It was 4 or 5. I think it was 5.
4 or 5, but a bit, the intensity was low to start, I remember, because we wanted to adapt and acclimate your body to the training. So we kept the intensity a bit lower, we kept the volume a bit lower, and we increased over time. And this is one thing too, where, you can attest to this. We worked out together a few weeks into your plan, and I was like, Rithik, I think that the RPE assessment on your end is a little bit low. We got to increase the weights, increase the RPE on some of these things. And that's, I think there's a lot of merit, a lot of value in being able to work out with your coach sometimes too, just so they can be like, hey, maybe fix this this little cue in your bench form, or maybe this is not an RPE and this is more like a 6. You got to go up a little bit and push a little bit harder here. So that's the way I typically go about it, though, is to make sure that we can acclimate at the beginning, we have a structured plan, and we increase over time. We make sure that the exercises that you're doing feel good on your muscles, your joints, all those sorts of things.
That day with the hack squats, it was it's pretty intense.
It's ingrained in your memory at this point.
It's a core memory at this point. I think this might sound like, oh, you really have to go there. I don't know, man. Sometimes in those moments where you have all that weight on you, and then you kind of just remember, to make it more dramatic, like you remember all the haters and all the people that did you wrong. You just got to eat the weight out. So you just go to certain places. But actually, kidding aside, all jokes and fun aside, I think getting to a point of intensity that I didn't know I could reach, and that was the only way I was able to get to that place, was by working with you in person. I think it was tremendously valuable, because then after the fact, you notice, like, Rithik, like, I think it was like the workout or two after that, they're like, kid, like, your workouts are great now. Like, you're hitting weights that I didn't think that before that hack squat you weren't able to hit. So I think definitely, like, there was a mental aspect there too.
I think a lot of people don't understand what a true RPE 10 is, because, going into something like a hack squat, if you're not fully focused and fully locked in to push your legs to the absolute limit, your RPE 10 might come way quicker than it probably should have at that point, because it is hard. I can do 5 plates on the hack squat for like 8 reps. And if I were to just go into that, it would feel so heavy the first 2 reps, no matter what. But if I lock myself into it, I warm up well, I get myself to a different place mentally where I'm like, I'm going to push myself as hard as I can. I think I did 20 reps 2 weeks ago. So like, there's a place where sometimes you got to go, and not to be dramatic, like you said, but for certain exercises, there's a place you got to go to be able to get the most out of that set. It's not going to be on a bicep curl. Like, you're not going to need to go to this deep, dark place to get the most out of it, because you're not using your whole body. But with a squat, it's going to take a lot more.
With the squat, with the bench press, absolutely. And real quick, I think people might look at the amount of things you have to track and like, do I really have to do the work? And I'm like, listen, just from my personal opinion, is whatever you don't measure doesn't get managed. And tracking calories, and actually, I think the app I personally use is Chronometer, just for a recommendation for anybody watching this, because what it'll do is you can put in the goal calorie that you want to hit for that day, and then it'll actually break down macronutrient wise, like, are you getting enough protein? Are you getting enough fats? Are you getting enough carbohydrates? And so people might not like the measurement part, and there might be something to eating intuitively, but working with you has definitely taught me that, is like, it probably is better you need to manage that. You need to track that.
And you can't, once you track for a while, you probably can eat intuitively, depending on your goals, because you're used to, you're understanding, the calories and the amount of protein, carbohydrates, fats in certain food groups that you're typically eating on a day to day. So like, you right now, you've been on a similar meal plan the last couple of weeks, and like we talked about things, recently on how you could hit the calorie goal you're at. So now you probably know, like, what you would have to eat to hit those numbers without actually logging them, just because you get used to it over time. I think where it's pretty valuable is when people don't really know where they're at, and they think they're bulking or they think they're cutting, and then they realize, like, oh wow, I was actually way under or way over. Or if they're eating different food groups, if they're going out a little bit more, if they're traveling, if they're doing different things, then you're not used to it. So you might not know what's in those specific food groups. When you're not like me and you've been, tracking stuff for years and years, you know what's in literally everything. So you have an eye for it. But most people, like, they know if they start tracking their day to day, they'll have an eye for their day to day, but not for the food groups they're not used to.
Absolutely. And actually, just to loop this back to our previous conversation about like cardio, but then they're just not losing weight too. You brought this up to me in another conversation, but more often than not, people are sneaking in calories they don't even mean to be sneaking in, and then they're exceeding the deficit they're supposed to be in. So that actually solves that issue too. Because I've heard it multiple times, like, I'm eating all these salads and I'm just not losing weight. And I'm like, you're over consuming somewhere. You have to be just from a calorie. You taught me this. Calories and calories are the equation.
Yeah, it's the law of thermodynamics. If you are not losing weight over an extended period of time, you don't have to lose weight every day, even over the course of a week. You might be holding a little bit of water. There's a lot of fluctuations, but if you're not losing weight over a long period of time, then you are not in a calorie deficit. No matter what you might think, you're over consuming somewhere, or at least consuming up to maintenance somewhere. And that's where a lot of these healthy food groups, it's, even though they're healthy, they're very, and when we say healthy, I'm saying that maybe they have a lot of protein, a lot of micronutrients, fiber, all things that come with being healthy. But it doesn't mean that you're in a calorie deficit just because you're eating healthy. You can still overeat on chicken, rice, and broccoli. You can still gain weight, gain fat on these super healthy food groups. And with you, for instance, we were at a point where you were eating like a very healthy, micronutrient dense salad at lunch every day. But then whenever we analyzed it, I was like, Rithik, you're eating 4 different fat sources that have probably 200 plus calories each in each of them. And then you're also having like the other stuff with the salad, which was like the chicken. And I think like maybe like some fruit or something. So you were having like a 1200 calorie salad where we took out some of the cheese. We made it half an avocado. And maybe we did like one less thing, and it cut the calories in half and was the same volume.
Yeah, that was for the subsequent cutting phase. Yeah. The bulk, exactly. I think you told me to add quinoa actually, so it was playing with the food ingredients.
Exactly, just making it. And this is where it comes back to like when I initially work with clients on how we can adjust, their day-to-day foods to meet their goals. Those are the little things we'll do. If you're eating a salad typically every day, well, keep eating the salad, but let's add this in here. Let's increase this portion of it to be able to get to those calorie and macro numbers.
Let's talk about how we implemented progressive overload, because I think the stereotypical marker of an increase in someone's strength is their bench press. I think, but just between gym bros. I think I started off like doing 135 pounds on bench press for like 5 or 6 reps. By the end, the bulk was over 2 mesocycles. So by the end of the bulk, I think my 1 rep max was 210 pounds, which was an amazing progress. And I'll probably put some like the pictures of my physique pre and post bulk. But yeah, can you talk about how you personally implemented progressive overload with me? Because it wasn't always strictly a weight increase week to week. Actually, I noticed that.
Mm-hmm. I think a lot of people get hung up on, and this is a very regular gym-goer thing where they're just so focused on, and I guess you probably have a little bit more strength when you're doing something like this, but they're so focused on only utilizing like the bigger plates, so the 45s and the 25s when they're doing things, and maybe they're like, oh, I'm benching today. I'm going to do, I'm going to do 225, and then I'm going to do 185, and then I'm going to do 135. And when you just look at it, that way, it's going to be very hard to get to that, let's say 275 number, because it's a 50-pound jump from the 2 plates and then, the additional 25. So with you, I'm sure you remember a lot of this because we're still doing it on a week to week. We're adding the micro plates, we're getting those 2.5s out because those are going to add up to the big plates over time. So that's, the first step is, in the most simple way to put it, is increase weight over time. So if you go 135 for 5, maybe 140 the week after that, maybe 145 the week after that. But, something that we'll do to be able to, break up the monotony, but also another form of progressive overload is you can't just increase intensity forever. You can't just increase 5 pounds every bench workout until the day you die, because then we'd be doing thousands and thousands of pounds on bench. You have to switch it up a little bit. So maybe you incorporate progressive overload in another way. Maybe that's increasing your volume. So you increase a set per workout, or you increase total reps per workout. So if you're doing 135 for 3 sets of 5 and you increase to 150 after 3 weeks, but it starts to get a little tougher, maybe we're like, okay, each of these sets is harder, but let's add an additional set and take the necessary rest time to be able to increase volume. So we're not increasing intensity as much anymore, or increasing volume. And then over time, we utilize that technique. And there's always going to be a plateau, but that's where you can mix and match and adjust in how we can incorporate progressive overload.
Absolutely, dude. And I'm assuming this is still the same principles you're using with your wrestling clients as well, right? They also have to do progressive overload as well. Is there anything you might change for them?
When it comes to progressive overload standpoint?
Progressive overload and strength training, yeah.
There is really not a lot that you change when it comes to progressive overload. You're looking to increase in the same sort of way that you would with anybody else. But I think with wrestlers, where it gets a little bit more niche, is that you have to look at their external factors, environmental factors, different things a little bit more. Because if you're, for you, the workout we're doing on a day-to-day is that specific workout. It's the strength training workout. With them, they might have had a really hard wrestling practice the day before, and they got another one the next day, and they have a run the day after that, where maybe their workouts could suffer a little bit because of the other training sessions that they're currently doing. So we have to make sure that they feel as best as possible. And in a sense there, we could be like, okay, let's adjust this workout to be, maybe we decrease the volume here, but we only focus on strength because you have volume built up in all these other areas of your training. So we have to look at it more from a recovery perspective as well, to be able to increase strength. But I would say, coming back around to the question on progressive overload itself, it's always going to come from intensity, increasing weight, increasing volume, maybe frequency, those three main pillars that we talked about early on.
Absolutely. I think that's a very important point you just made, is that because they also have to balance a wrestling training on top of the weightlifting.
Yeah.
Sometimes on the same day, right? I think you yourself.
Oh, yeah. All the time.
Yeah. Weightlifting in the morning, and then you got your wrestling training in the afternoon. So you have to prioritize the wrestling performance, and then the weightlifting has to be conducive to that. So the principles applied across the average person. So this is the example versus someone like Jack, right? They would be doing their wrestling would still, their weight training, would still use progressive overload, but maybe it's not to the same intensity you would put me through for maybe a certain day. Am I kind of hitting on the mark there?
Yes, definitely. And with you, maybe we decrease intensity on some days because you got a really bad sleep or something. Like that would be the one, that would be something that I could foresee happening, and it has happened with a lot of my different clients, where it's like, oh, we got way less sleep, we didn't eat as much, we haven't missed any sort of workouts in a while, like maybe we should take this day. But with wrestlers, it's like, we have, let's say, 6 other training sessions outside of this one for the week that could consist of strength, wrestling, conditioning, all these different factors, where it does play a pivotal role in how you can perform in that strength training session based on the other sessions you're doing.
Absolutely. And then, so let's talk about the cut then. So, I bulked up to, I think the most I weighed at one point was 183 pounds. So bulking up from 160-ish to 183. And then let's talk about the transition to the cut actually is more so because, again, we talked about reverse dieting. So what makes for a good and efficient reverse diet is an important concept to really hammer home.
Are you saying bulk to cut?
Bulk to cut, because I think something you said to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that you didn't want me to just immediately just starve myself, right? It was important to you that we did this gradually.
Yeah. So whether you're bulking or cutting, you don't want to just increase or decrease a ton right away, because if you bulk and you increase a ton right away, you could accumulate too much fat, unnecessary fat. And then if you decrease calories right away in a cut, you could lose weight quicker, but you could also lose muscle quicker. You could also feel a lot worse in the gym, decrease performance. You could also decrease your basal metabolic rate a lot quicker. All these different factors that typically come towards the end of a cut could come a lot sooner than you would like them to. So, after a bulking phase, you want to try to get the most bang for your buck with doing the least in your cut. So say you were eating like 3,300 calories for your bulk, and it was tough. It was tough to get that in. You were dying on a day-to-day. So that means your maintenance was right around, if you were gaining, close to a pound a week, your maintenance was around a 2,800 to 3,000 calorie day. So if we want to be in a deficit from there, maybe we go, we see how 2,500 is at first. And then once you reach a plateau from there, then we decrease a little bit more. Then we increase a little bit on the steps to be able to burn a little bit extra calories. So, by the time we get to 2,100 calories, you're, 15 pounds of fat down, versus if we went straight to 2,100 calories, you would lose a lot of weight quick, but you might have not gotten as low, and your basal metabolic rate and all these different factors might have decreased weight quicker, and you might have lost more strength, more muscle, and it was just an overall worse experience for the cut. So we want to make sure that we're not decreasing your basal metabolic rate super quickly. We're not decreasing muscle mass. We're not losing strength. We're trying to keep everything that we built in the bulk, so we can maintain that muscle in the cut and strip away the fat.
And again, same concepts applied to your elite athlete clients, right? Again, are there any nuances to the cutting that I didn't have to deal with, the average person doesn't have to deal with, that they do, or vice versa?
They have days where the training is way higher. So you might have a day-to-day where you're 2,500 calories. That's what it is. But I think it's stupid, and, some people still do this, but I think it's dumb to have an athlete who, is on a rest day, eat the same amount of calories that they're going to eat on a day where they train 3 times. It's just, they're burning a completely different amount of calories. Now with you, a rest day versus a training day, it's one training session. So even though you might be burning more, maybe it's 500 more. It's not 2,000 calories of exercise more on that day. So that's where, with elite level athletes, they might need to have calorie targets for the specific days to be in the deficit, rather than just a daily target over the week. They might have a weekly target, which we can, break down over each day, but each day is not going to be the same deficit. A rest day should not be the same as a day they're training 3 times.
Yeah. You actually get hyper specific with them, actually, on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah. Some of them, it would be like, I would get down to the micro level of, they'd be like, hey, is this good? Is this what I should eat right now? What would you put for MyFitnessPal in this burrito that I'm eating right here? In like that level,
Yeah. It's funny. So speaking on the diet though, because I think so what's funny is that, again, it ties back to an earlier point you made. There were days where I skipped out of the steps, like mea culpa. I wasn't able to do them. But even then, and again, I could probably put pictures and posts of my like my pre-cut physique and then my post-cut physique. I noticed a change for sure. I know you said you did, and we'll see if the audience says it as well. But I didn't really do as much cardio on days, but still I was able to cut down, and I think mainly was due to the strength training and the diet.
And another tool that we utilize with YouTube, and those were the two main tools, 100%. But was step count. That's one thing that makes it so much easier. It doesn't feel like you're doing that much work, but if you're used to 7,000 steps, and then, we decided to start doing different things, walking to work, walking to the gym, whatever it might be, and you increase your steps to 10 or 11K, but didn't actually add any additional cardio. It's like, wow, I'm burning an extra couple hundred calories a day without even really realizing it, because getting extra steps isn't that exhausting. It's not that taxing on your body. It doesn't impede recovery or anything. So, no, I definitely agree though that like the training and the nutrition, the strength training and the nutrition are probably going to be key factors in it.
And then from the diet perspective, you were also giving me specific examples of how to best get my bang out of my buck for my diet. So again, we changed a couple of things. So for example, the salad that Greg mentioned, I think I was eating chicken, Parmesan cheese, spinach, avocado, and balsamic vinaigrette, and we would kind of change a couple of things. So one thing again you said is half the avocado, take out the quinoa that I added in the bowl, things like that. Actually, I think you even said from a scientific perspective, if you up the amount of protein through the thermic effect of food, you're actually burning more calories. Could you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, so there's four different ways that everybody burns calories on a day to day. You're gonna have your basal metabolic rate. You're gonna have the thermic effect of food. You're gonna have non-exercise activity thermogenesis, and you're gonna have exercise. So we talked about basal metabolic rate, just what your body burns, just with its metabolic processes on a day to day. Exercise, everybody knows. Non-exercise activity thermogenesis, that could be things like fidgeting, moving around, talking, doing the dishes, just little things that add up during the day. And then there's the thermic effect of food. So you burn calories by digesting food. In protein, you actually tend to burn the most, whenever you're digesting it. So it's about 20% of the total calories within protein that you're going to burn in the thermic effect of food. So if you're consuming, let's say 1,000 calories of protein a day, you can burn 200 of those through the thermic effect of food. Where with carbohydrates and fats, it's much smaller. I think it's right around 5%. So if you have 1,000 calories worth of carbs, then it's only going to be 5% of that. It's only going to be 50 calories versus that 200. So even though it's not a crazy difference, that difference, that 150 calories, let's say, over the course of a week, over the course of a month, adds.
Absolutely. And I mean, I'm not a fitness trainer or anything, but even from a logical perspective, if you change the composition of your diet to include more protein-rich diet, that would be more conducive to fat loss. I'm not saying if you're obese and you started suddenly just going on a carnivore diet that you're immediately going to lose all that fat. I don't think that's how it works, but I think, tell me if you agree, it's more so just you add that on top of the strength training, on top of using cardio effectively, and then on top of not just increasing the amount of protein, but then also just making sure your diet's just balanced in general.
Yeah, it's everything there has to be balance with everything. And you bring up, carnivore too, with something like carnivore, where people will see like quick results, a lot quicker than, let's just say, like a regular diet, where it's like balanced carbohydrates, protein, fats. But in that case, there is always, you have to look at a few different things. You have to look at the fact that if you're not consuming carbohydrates, then you don't have glycogen stored, like we're talking about, like glycogen in your muscles. So there's a lot less water, because carbohydrate, you're holding water from each carb. So you're not holding that water anymore. You might lose weight quicker. So, there's a lot of nuance in diets. But what it's going to come down to at the end of the day is calories in, calories out. That's how you lose weight. You could overeat on protein too.
I think I imagine what's really important though, you tell me if I'm wrong, but from the perspective of someone who's a fitness trainer and a wrestling coach, like such as yourself, I think receipts and evidence of, your legitimacy in those positions are really important. So your wrestling clients, both from a physique perspective, well, actually, first of all, let's actually remove your clients for a minute. You yourself, actually, your physique is a receipt or evidence of that you know what you're doing. And then from a performance perspective on your wrestling clients, their performance on the mats and then their physique are another receipt or another piece of evidence. And then also, you have clients such as myself who, we're not competing, we're not elite athletes. So you could make the excuse that, oh, well, we're not competing at a high level. So, we can't make those kinds of gains. But I mean, I think I did, pretty well under your guidance, and still am to this day. Could you talk about the importance of receipts and evidence for someone who's not only a online fitness trainer, but then also in the collegiate athlete world as well?
I think, when it comes to just fitness in general, like, people want to be coached by somebody who looks good. They want to look like them, or at least have similarity to how they look at the end of the day. So if you are, you're overweight and you're preaching fitness and this and that, like, most people are going to be like, why should I believe this person? So you gotta look the part, when it comes to like an aesthetic standpoint. And when it comes to wrestling, I think there's two things why I'm able to get different clients with wrestling. There's obviously the, how I look, the weights that I lift, the strength that I have. But then there's also the side of it that I am an accomplished wrestler too. So I have the Division I All-American status, and then I look how I look, and I talk about all these different things on social media that, like you're saying, provide receipts. They're like, oh wow, he did this and currently does this, and then just a little bit extra to be able to help with that is, when I can post client transformations, when I can be like, hey, I did this for myself and I did this for these other people. When you don't have those, like you're saying, sort of receipts, you don't just gain trust and credibility out of nowhere. Like it has to be built somewhere.
I've seen you do your work on the wrestling mats, and like, so your skill on the mats is just as legitimate as then is your physique. So it's like a double whammy. It's actually reminds me a bit of Gordon Ryan. He's a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu no-gi competitor, and also gi, but I think still in today's day and age is considered pound for pound like the best no-gi grappler at the very least in today's generation. And compared to you don't trash talk, but like he trash talks a lot. But the frustrating thing is he can back up the trash talk with his skills on the mat. I know sometimes you've posted some videos like, I can still eat this crumble cookie and still look like this. And I imagine for some people might look at that and it's like, that's a little bit arrogant, but still like, when you have it on the long form and you explain why, and you look the way you have the physique the way you do, you clearly know what you're doing. So that of course enables you to eat those crumble cookies and still look this way.
Mm-hmm. Gordon Ryan's, man. I mean, he's also the face of jiu-jitsu at this point where like he's making a lot of money in, being like that. So I would do the same exact thing if I was him because that dude is skilled too. But like you're saying with the crumble cookie side of it, like it's, we're in a day and age where social media, it can be a tool for you in growing your business, growing your platform. And sometimes you got to get people a little riled up. So, if I say like POV, I consume seed oils and artificial sweeteners daily, you got all the zealots that are like, you can't eat that. That's horrible for you, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
Your health is horrible, all this, when at the end of the day, it's balance. Should you eat tons of crumble cookies every day? No, but can you eat crumble? You could eat a crumble cookie every single day and still lose fat. You could eat a crumble cookie every day and gain fat. It just depends, what else happens in your day-to-day and your diet and your training and everything else.
Because we had a conversation about this too. Because I think you said from a calories in, calories out perspective, that's why dirty bulking is a thing. That's where you could technically still eat that and still get the physique. Now, if you're, again, depends on what your criteria for success and what your goals are. If you're going to talk about the other aspects of your day where you're going to get bogged down by a crappy diet, then that's where a whole diet or a healthy diet actually comes into play. But if you're talking just from a calories, like a macros perspective, yeah, you could technically still do that.
Dude, I'm at the point right now where like I've been in the cut for a while where my appetite's pretty high and I'm lean enough to where I could eat 10,000 calories in a day, and I burn typically like 5,000 in a day. So I could eat 10,000 calories in a day, and I'll know the next day, all right, I am 5,000 calories over what I burned. Maybe there's a little bit through thermic effects of food and different things like that increase, but let's just not account for that. The next 3 days, I would have to be in a 5,000 calorie deficit, which I could eat 3,000, and then I could eat 3,000 again, and then I could eat 4,000. And if I burn 5,000 calories on all 3 of those days, I'm back to completely normal. And that's where like a lot of people don't realize that one day of bad eating doesn't kill you, just like, multiple days of good eating, or like one day of good eating or a few days of good eating doesn't, make you super healthy.
Yeah. And again, this is the throw line that you've been threading through the conversation is what part of the, I think part of the Iron Elite methodology, you tell me if I'm kind of hitting the hammer on the nail, is sustainability and consistency. And the idea is that, you have the one day, but we account for that. And it's more so about success over time versus, you screwed up on the one day. Now progress gets started all over again. No, that's not how this works.
You're on the money, and that's across the board. Training, nutrition, no matter what it is. And it's something that a lot of people don't, can't wrap their mind around initially, but, once they're able to, some days you're not feeling, maybe your chest doesn't feel that great in the gym. you push it one day back and you feel great. Maybe one day you go over on your nutrition, on your calories. That's all right. You set yourself one day back, you get back on it after. It's all about sustainability.
Absolutely. Looping back to social media though, tell me, I'm sure that it's quite fulfilling to see your clients succeed like after, because I think my personal opinion is that I think fitness is one of the buckets in life that can feed into other things. So when you help a client get better at, weightlifting and they get the physique that they always wanted, then that starts to spill into other parts of their life. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Definitely. I think the way I look at it is stacking many wins on the day. If you can do one thing, that starts your day off strong, and then that can just keep compounding. And I think fitness is really good for that, because if you can just even, there's a lot more to it than checking a box, but even if you can check a box on that workout daily, you're accomplishing something, whether it means a lot to you or it doesn't. And over time, if you reach that goal, it's just like this. It's the same thing as, business, any sort of career side of it, any sort of schooling. You put in a lot of work to achieve a goal, and it translates directly to other aspects of your life. The work ethic that you can instill in yourself, the discipline to be able to go to the gym every day, to be able to hit your macronutrients, this and that. And I think that's where, wrestling initially taught me that discipline, that work ethic. But my passion for bodybuilding, also turns into a discipline at the end of the day, because even though I really like lifting, I really like this and that, it is a discipline sometimes. I don't want to go to the gym every single day. So it translates directly to the business side of it that we talked about, to the coaching side of it, to the time management. And I think a lot of people, once they get in that habit, they realize, how much more it is than just fitness and achieving their fitness goals, but how it can improve their lifestyle.
You actually had a reel about that, if I'm not mistaken. It was the reel of how I feel when I want to go to the gym, and then how I feel when I don't want to go to the gym, and it's the exact same thing. And I completely agree. It's just, some days you just don't want to do it, but it's just another thing that has to get done. And that's just the way I personally look at it.
Yeah, the quicker you can rely on discipline and not motivation, the easier your goals are gonna come to you.
Though, actually, interestingly enough, I've heard of another concept where discipline itself is a muscle. So, this goes actually to more to your point earlier, where you do actually want to enjoy going to the gym, because what's happening is, as you said, you're stacking many wins. So it becomes less, maybe it's in the beginning, it's some motivation, then it's discipline. Then I like this concept called positive momentum, where you're stacking wins and you're seeing the changes in your physique. And then going to the gym just comes in after that. It just becomes part of who you are.
Definitely. And it's like we're talking about, it applies to so many different things. If you can find enjoyment in your work, if you can find enjoyment in, any sort of day to day, anything that you're doing, it makes it so much easier to wake up in the morning and go about your day. It makes it so much easier to take that step out the door to go to the gym, to do, whatever it is. Realistically, just like finding enjoyment in the process in some way is going to make your life a hell of a lot easier.
As a online, fitness coach, and I'd say an influencer, you've definitely been an influence on me, a very positive influence on me. So very
Maybe
much appreciated.
Influencer.
What would you have any advice as to how to market yourself, especially in the fitness space, where one could argue that it's saturated? Not that that doesn't necessarily mean you can't succeed, but how do you set yourself apart, and then how do you market that? I'm curious to how you personally do it.
It's saturated, but if you have a good physique, realistically, you can be in the fitness community no matter what. You just I think so. What I'll say, and what helped me, is first going to be consistency. It's maybe you don't have an elaborate plan on how you're going to build social media or build your business, but if you just tell yourself you're going to post every single day, no matter what, and it's going to be related to what you're trying to accomplish in let's say the fitness industry, will be my main piece of advice, is just posting every day, being consistent, because then you're going to see over time what is gaining traction, what is working, what isn't. And from there, maybe you don't really know what you want your niche to be, or maybe there isn't a niche. Maybe it's just like fitness and your lifestyle. But you can start to see with your own eyes, okay, this is gaining more traction than this was. And, I noticed my engagement's higher on this than this. And that's how you can start to filter out, what you want to talk about a little bit more, or how you might be able to grow yourself, a little bit quicker, and all those sorts of things. So just consistency, and then being mindful of what you're posting, and, understanding what's gaining a little bit more traction and engagement. Then, the rest will come into place, because then you're just going to be like, okay, well, I'm still consistent. I notice this is working. Maybe I lean in this direction. And over time, if you're consistent with anything, you're probably going to see results.
I think the only thing I will also personally add, and this is coming from a mentor of mine, where a lot of there's a mentality of it's better to take action rather than just sit around and procrastinate with planning. And I do agree with that, but just one small nuance. There's a gray line between using preparation as a procrastination tool versus using it as a tool for success. So you're better off with at least having an idea of where your brand wants to go, at least. And then, as you say, I like the same personally, is a suspension of disbelief and the speed of implementation. So if you find something that works, then just do it. Like that, do it. But taking that action, but you need to at least have an idea of like where you're going. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, and I'd say like, with what you're saying, it would be like comparing somebody saying, I want to be big and grow my social media, versus I want to be big and grow my social media in the fitness space because of this. You know what I mean? So like I 100% agree with you.
Yeah, I think the word there is intention. You need intention behind whatever you do. I think definitely in the game you and I are playing as insofar as on social media, like I'm personally trying to grow my own brand as well. The podcast is part of that. The blog I've been writing for since last year is also part of that as well. So yeah, you absolutely need to be intentional. I'm curious, because since we're talking about the space, what are your some criticisms? What are criticisms you have of the fitness influencer space? It could be about how the influencers themselves conduct themselves, maybe the advice they dispense. I'm just curious what comes to the top of your mind when I ask that question.
Honestly, I don't have criticisms. Like, I think anybody who's like growing and, doing what they want to do, like, I'm totally fine with that. And I don't want that to be like some sort of, answer that, I get along with everybody and this and that. I don't really care what most people are doing in the industry. But what I will say is I'm not a huge fan of when somebody is so far one way or another. So for instance, all the people that push carnivore, they're like, carnivore is the best. You need to be on carnivore because of this. You can't eat sugar because of X, Y, and Z. And like, you see those people that are, they'll go to Crumble Cookie, they'll go stand outside of it, and they'll be like, I'll pay you $100 not to eat this. There's 100 ingredients in this. And have you seen that? You haven't seen that?
I have not seen that. I mean, I'm aware.
Oh my God, look it up. There's a lot of
I'm aware
videos.
Crumble Cookies don't. Here's the thing. I don't think it takes a genius to know that Crumble Cookies probably have things that you probably shouldn't be eating on the daily.
Exactly. But coming back to your question, like, I think it's just the people that are so far disconnected that like really believe that like one way is the only way. That's probably one of the most annoying things. But at the end of the day, maybe they're just doing that on social media because they know that they get a lot of views. I don't really know. I don't know them personally. That could be it, or they could be a little delusional. But
I think that point's actually really interesting, because you're a very well-read guy. You read research articles. I mean, don't you have a degree? You have a degree from exercise physiology from Rutgers, don't you?
Exercise science.
In exercise science. So you're very well-read and can articulate yourself very well. I just think the issue is that unfortunately on Instagram, on social media in general, nuance doesn't go viral. Because the correct answer I've found is if someone knows what they're doing and they ask you a question, the answer is not this or that, is it depends.
Exactly. And I think, where when somebody's more similar to me in the sense where it's like the balance and everything, what gains traction, and we were just talking about this, is saying like, I can eat crumble cookies and still look like this, or I can eat seed oils on a daily basis and still look like this. But then you can resort back to, because it's balance, because it's, all these different lifestyle factors, because it's all these boring things,
Yeah, I mean, like, truth be told, it's a great marketing tactic, because it's to listen. It's a game. It's part of the game. It's part of the way it works. It is what it is. I'm not complaining about it. Like, it's along the lines of, don't hate the player, hate the game. But outrage and controversy does sell. But I think what's interesting is if you use that as a hook to get people in, and then once you have them, you then reveal that you're actually more nuanced. Like, oh, wait a minute. Okay, so I get what this guy's doing. I got you. I understand.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. And, that's exactly, you put it exactly what we're trying to do. I say we're, like, social media influencers, but you want a hook that can catch these people's attention and get them biting a little bit. And then, for me, at least, the way I view it is, I want people who can resonate and enjoy my content too. So if they see this sort of thing and then they start looking at my page and they're like, oh, this was to get me here essentially, but he puts up some good stuff, then I want that type of person to follow me at the end of the day.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great filtering tool, because it filters out the people you don't want as clients. We talked about earlier about how, you ideally want clients who are going to listen to what you say and like working with you, have, the personalities mesh. So yeah, it's a great filtering tool. I'm curious, because I think we've talked about this before, one-on-one, but I know you have also a good amount of knowledge on, like, steroids and testosterone. I'm curious, like, what is your impression of the impact on the impact on what male physique should look like with all these, like, anabolic steroids and everything that come on social media? You might have people on social media who they don't say that they're using anabolic steroids, but it's clearly apparent. They go on social media and then they grow a brand, but then I think it might distort the average person's impression of what the male physique should look like. I'm just curious of what your thoughts on that were.
There's definitely more of a distorted view with social media, on what is achievable naturally versus what isn't, and how long it takes. I don't have anything against people who are, whether they're pro bodybuilders or they're just on TRT or like whatever they might be doing or anything, like, totally up to them. I think, just my 2 cents is, kids aspiring to, have a really good physique or even be a bodybuilder or whatever it might be, like, should really focus on improving their own physiques initially and not wanting to look like, this social media influencer, because it takes a lot of time. So if you can just focus on the progress that you can make, and maybe after, you've been training for 10 plus years, 20 plus years, you decided you wanted to take something in, like, a safe way, or you went on testosterone replacement therapy or whatever it might be, like, I think that's your best bet, is to build that foundation as best as you can naturally and understand your body and go through puberty and do all the right things, and then make that sort of decision, because you have the base, rather than just looking at these, like a Togi, for instance, the guy, and he was completely honest. He's like, I saw what some people looked like, and I did not want to wait 8 to 10 years for that. And I got my dream physique within a year, which totally cool. I guess you could do that. But I think there's a lot that comes with the grind of the first of that 10 years that you can put into and really get the most and milk the most out of that sort of natural physique at that point. And then maybe you achieve that dream physique that you have, and you also got all the work ethic and, discipline that comes along with it.
Absolutely. And it's just, the way I like to break it down is, there are short-term consequences, there are long-term consequences, and then you can split those up into good and bad. So if you're okay, the short-term consequence of taking anabolic steroids at a young age is that, yeah, you might get that dream physique you want very quickly, quicker than most. But just be aware that the long-term consequences might be, like, fertility issues, or I think from my understanding is your ability to produce testosterone naturally because you're taking anabolic steroids. That does erode your body's ability to do that. So as long as you're informed up front, and then as a influencer, you're being transparent about, hey, listen, like this was my decision. These are the consequences, both good and bad. Make these decisions with all the information you can get. Like, be fully informed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, totally agree.
Absolutely. Dude, I think we've been talking for, like close to 2 hours. So the last thing I wanted to ask you is, let's say it's, like your tombstone, and, you're going to be engraved in, fitness influencer, or not even fitness influencer. It could be like wrestling too, whatever you want, in like the Mount Rushmore of these people. What would your advice be to, if they looked up Greg Bulsak, they would see like this quote or this piece of advice?
Let's go towards the quote end of it. Something that's been my wallpaper for years now. Many dreams die while suffering. And I'm sure you could, maybe not instantly, but you could put it together pretty quickly. A lot of people have these big, lofty goals that they can talk about. They're all motivated. And we've been coming back to this motivation versus discipline thing for a while. But once, let's use wrestling, for example. Once you're in minute 6 of a really tough match, you're super tired. You can't even feel your legs anymore. That dream slowly starts to fade. Dreams die while suffering, essentially. So, the one thing that's I've stuck with and that's lived in my head is making sure that, when I am suffering, when I don't want to do something, that I'm still looking at, what that end goal is, or like what I would think about tomorrow with this certain decision that I'm going to make, and all those sorts of things. So like staying true to what my goals are and not letting, different hiccups or suffering, we're going to say in this sense, get in the way of that might be.
I love it, dude. I mean, for sure. I just, being here I'm going to be 25 soon. So, about 24 years on this planet, I've learned that if there's any one constant, there's always going to be trials and tribulations. And there's going to be moments where you are, quote unquote, you're suffering. But it's those periods where it sounds cliche to say, but those are the ones that make or break you. And if you can get out of those things, not necessarily unscathed, but you can get through them. Those are the things that turn, what would break the, I don't necessarily want to say ordinary person, but I would say like what would break one person is you're going to go through that, and you're going to come out stronger and having learned, and then you're going to go on and be stronger for the next period of suffering. I totally agree.
Yeah, couldn't have said it better.
Yes, sir. Greg, thank you so much for coming on, man. I really appreciate it.
Of course, man. Of course. I can't even believe it's been over 2 hours. Feels like we were just having a conversation.
I mean, we were basically, I know it's been an issue. This isn't even an issue. I love it. I always get fired up when we get on coaching calls. And then we both know it could turn into a 2-hour
podcast. That's for sure. Yeah.
It could turn into a 2-hour podcast, just us talking on those coaching calls. If people want to find you, where can they go?
Yeah. So Instagram, Greg_B25, and then TikTok, it's going to be GB Swole. The Greg _B25 was taken whenever I made one. I don't know who that guy is, but he should have switched his name.
And then you also have a member site as well, right?
Yep. So www.ironelite.com, or you could go to my Instagram and go to the link in the bio. I have one-on-one personalized coaching, personalized plans, Iron Elite membership site. So that'll all be at the link in my bio on Instagram too.
Absolutely. And I'll make sure that we put that in the description of this video as well, so people can just right on, click in, and if they want to work with you, and they can, get all the great guidance that I've had the pleasure of having. We'll make sure we can get that in the description. Greg, thank you so much, man. Appreciate you, close friend and mentor, and this is a pleasure.
Hey, thanks for having me, man. It was a great time.
All right, take care, man.
Yep, have a good one.